The fortress town of Terezin sat quietly in the Czech countryside, its yellow walls built centuries ago to defend against invaders. But in November 1941, those same walls became prison barriers when the Nazis transformed the entire town into a ghetto and transit camp. Among the first to arrive were families from Prague, herded onto trains with a single suitcase each, told they were being resettled. The children pressed their faces to the windows as they left, watching their city disappear, not understanding they were leaving behind everything they had ever known. By early 1942, over 15,000 children had passed through Terezin's gates, ranging from infants to teenagers. Most would never leave alive. The deception began immediately. Nazi propaganda called Terezin a model Jewish settlement, a gift from Hitler to the Jews. Posters showed smiling families, clean streets, productive workshops. The reality behind the walls told a different story. The fortress, designed to house a few thousand soldiers, now contained over 50,000 people crammed into every available space. Barracks meant for dozens held hundreds. Attics, cellars, casemates beneath the ramparts all became living quarters. Families were separated immediately upon arrival. Men sent to one section, women and children to another. The children learned quickly that nothing they had been told was true. The youngest ones cried for parents they could no longer see. Others stood in shocked silence, trying to process what was happening. They had been torn from comfortable Prague apartments, from schools and playgrounds, from lives of normalcy. Now they stood in a medieval fortress, surrounded by walls and guards, with no understanding of why. Some children had parents or relatives with them. Others arrived alone, separated from families during the chaos of deportation, or sent ahead while parents remained behind. Promised they would follow soon. Those promises, like so many others, dissolved in the machinery of the Holocaust. The accommodation shocked even those who thought they had prepared themselves. Children were assigned to overcrowded rooms in converted barracks, sleeping on triple-tiered bunks stacked so close together that turning over at night meant hitting the bunk above. The mattresses were thin straw pallets that offered little comfort against the wooden slats. In winter, cold seeped through every crack, and the single stove in each room barely produced enough heat. In summer, the unventilated spaces became unbearably hot, the air thick and stale. Disease spread rapidly in such conditions, and children fell ill constantly with everything from simple colds to tuberculosis and typhus. Food became an obsession within days of arrival. Rations were deliberately kept below starvation levels, part of the Nazi strategy to weaken prisoners before deporting them east. Children received watery soup made from potato peelings, a small portion of bread that had to last all day, and occasionally ersatz coffee that tasted of burnt grain. The hunger was constant, gnawing, all-consuming. Children who had once been picky eaters now scraped every last drop from their bowls, licking them clean, hoping to find one more molecule of sustenance. They dreamed about food, talked endlessly about meals they remembered, and felt their bodies slowly consuming themselves. The physical changes came quickly. Cheeks hollowed, eyes grew large in thinning faces. Growth stopped. Energy faded. Children who should have been running and playing moved slowly, conserving every calorie. Their clothes, already worn and shabby, hung loose on shrinking frames. Hair lost its luster, growing brittle and dull. Teeth loosened from malnutrition. Wounds healed slowly or not at all. The children were literally wasting away, and everyone knew it. Parents who could see their children during permitted times wept at the transformation, watching their sons and daughters fade before their eyes. Yet amid this systematic destruction, something remarkable occurred. The children of Theresienstadt refused to let their spirits die as easily as their bodies. They created a world within the world, a hidden realm of imagination and defiance that the Nazis could not fully control. It began with small acts. Children shared stories, whispered jokes, sang songs quietly in corners. They found scraps of paper and made games, folding elaborate designs, creating playing cards from cardboard. They collected small treasures, buttons, stones, bits of colored glass, and traded them like currency. These tiny acts of normalcy became weapons against despair. The real transformation began when adults in the camp, determined to preserve some fragment of childhood, organized secret schools. Education was forbidden by the Nazis, who saw no reason to educate those destined for extermination. But teachers and parents refused to accept this. In hidden corners of barracks, in basements and attics, classes began. Children learned mathematics, languages, history, and science from textbooks smuggled into the camp or reconstructed from memory. The lessons were constantly interrupted, moved from place to place to avoid discovery, but they persisted. For the children, these secret schools represented more than education. They represented hope that there might be a future worth preparing for. Among the teachers who arrived at Theresienstadt in 1942 was a woman whose impact would echo across decades. Friedl Dicker-Brandeis was an artist and designer who had studied at the Bauhaus in Weimar, learning from some of Europe's most innovative minds. She had built a successful career designing homes, teaching art, and creating stage sets. When deportation orders came, she could have brought practical items, clothing, food, tools. Instead, she packed art supplies, paper, pencils, paints, charcoal, brushes. Her husband thought she had lost her mind, wasting precious weight allowance on such things. But Friedl understood something deeper. She knew that where she was going, children would need more than bread. They would need a way to remain human. Friedl began teaching art classes in the children's barracks almost immediately upon arrival. At first, the children were hesitant. Art seemed frivolous in a place of such suffering. But Friedl was persistent and patient. She understood trauma in ways that few adults did. She knew that children who had lost everything needed a way to express what words could not capture. She set up small studios in corners of rooms, gathering groups of children and giving them paper and colors. At first, she simply let them explore, make marks, experiment. There were no rules, no judgments, only encouragement. The transformation was subtle at first. Children who had been withdrawn and silent began to engage. Those who had seemed broken by trauma found something awakening inside them. As they drew and painted, they entered worlds of their own creation, places where guards did not exist, where walls disappeared, where freedom was possible. Friedl watched and guided, never imposing her vision, always drawing out theirs. She taught them to see differently, to find beauty even in the gray monotony of the camp. A patch of sky visible through a window became a study in blue. The shadow patterns on a wall became exercises in light and dark. The children's artwork began to fill the barracks, drawings pinned to walls, paintings tucked under mattresses, sketches passed between friends. Some drew from memory, recreating the homes and streets they had left behind. Others drew from imagination, inventing fantastical scenes of gardens and castles and adventures. Still others drew what they saw, documenting life in Terezin with the clear eyes of children who understood more than adults realized. The art became a form of resistance, proof that creativity could survive even in hell. Friedl taught hundreds of children during her time in Terezin, and she saved everything they created. She understood instinctively that these works were more than art. They were testimony. She gathered the drawings and paintings, carefully organizing them, and hid them in 2 suitcases that she concealed in the attic of a children's barracks. She told no one except a trusted few where they were hidden. If she did not survive, she wanted the children's voices to endure. Their art would speak for them when they could no longer speak for themselves. The subjects the children chose revealed their inner worlds. Many drew butterflies, creatures of transformation and freedom. They drew flowers in gardens they could no longer visit. They drew houses with smoke rising from chimneys, symbols of home and safety. They drew children playing, running, laughing, engaging in activities that were now forbidden. Some drew dark images too: barbed wire, guards with guns, crowded rooms, skeletal figures. These darker works were fewer, but they showed that children understood exactly what was happening to them. They were not fooled by Nazi propaganda or adult attempts to shield them from reality. One of the most haunting images that emerged from those sessions was a simple drawing of a butterfly, accompanied by a poem that began, "The last, the very last, so richly, brightly, dazzlingly yellow." Perhaps if the sun's tears would sing against a white stone, the child who created it, Pavel Friedman, captured in a few lines what volumes could not express. The butterfly represented everything lost: beauty and freedom and life itself. He drew and wrote it in 1942. In 1944, he was transported to Auschwitz and murdered. His butterfly survived him, becoming one of the most famous pieces of Holocaust art. The children's poetry was equally powerful. In the secret schools and hidden corners, they wrote verses that captured their experiences with devastating clarity. They wrote about hunger, about missing parents, about fear, about hope. They wrote about ordinary things that had become extraordinary in their absence: sunshine, laughter, the simple act of running freely. Their words were mature beyond their years, aged by trauma but still carrying the essential voice of childhood. Teachers collected these poems, preserving them alongside the artwork, creating a record of interior lives that statistics could never capture. Life in Terezin followed a brutal rhythm: roll calls at dawn, regardless of weather or illness; work assignments for older children; exhausting labor in workshops or fields. Younger children attended the secret schools when possible, always aware that discovery meant punishment. Meals came at set times, never enough, always the same thin soup and dry bread. Disease was constant, and the camp hospital overflowed with sick children. Doctors and nurses worked miracles with almost no medicine or equipment, but they could not save everyone. Children died regularly, their small bodies carried to the crematorium that operated day and night. The psychological impact was devastating. Children witnessed death constantly, saw friends disappear to transports east, heard the whispered truth that Terezin was not the final destination, but merely a waiting room for something worse. They learned to recognize the signs that someone was marked for deportation: the summons, the packing, the tearful goodbyes. They watched as families were torn apart, children separated from parents, siblings divided. The trauma accumulated in layers, each loss adding to the weight these young souls carried. Yet Friedl's art classes continued. In those moments when children sat with paper and colors, they found temporary escape. The act of creation became meditative, almost therapeutic. Friedl encouraged them to pour everything into their work, all their fear, all their longing, all their hope. She taught them that art could be a weapon, that by creating beauty in a place designed to crush beauty, they were fighting back. The children began to understand that their drawings and paintings were more than personal expression. They were acts of defiance, declarations that they still existed, still mattered, still had souls that could not be extinguished. The older children in Terezin took on roles of protecting the younger ones. Teenagers became surrogate parents to orphan children, sharing their meager rations, telling bedtime stories, offering comfort in the night when nightmares came. They organized activities, put on plays and concerts, created moments of joy in the darkness. These older children understood, perhaps more clearly than the younger ones, what fate likely awaited them. Yet they chose to spend their remaining time giving hope to others, preserving innocence where they could, fighting against the dehumanization that surrounded them. The Nazis occasionally permitted cultural activities, seeing them as useful for propaganda. Children performed in orchestras and theatrical productions, their performances filmed and photographed to show the world how well Jews were treated in the model ghetto. These staged events were grotesque farces. The children, starving and terrified, were forced to smile and perform while cameras captured images for Nazi propaganda. Between performances, they returned to overcrowded barracks and starvation rations. The disconnect between the performance and reality was yet another cruelty inflicted upon them. In June 1944, the Nazis orchestrated an elaborate deception. The International Red Cross was permitted to visit Terezin, and the camp underwent a beautification campaign. Buildings were painted, gardens planted, shops opened with goods that would disappear the moment the inspection ended. Children were given new clothes and told to appear happy and healthy. They were coached on what to say if questioned. The Red Cross delegation arrived, saw the carefully staged scenes, and left satisfied that conditions were acceptable. The children watched in disbelief as the outside world fell for the lie. Within days of the delegation's departure, transports to Auschwitz resumed with increased intensity. Friedl Dicker-Brandeis was deported to Auschwitz in October 1944. She could have tried to avoid the transport, could have used connections or hidden. Instead, she chose to accompany a group of children who were being sent east, knowing what awaited them, but unwilling to let them face it alone. In Auschwitz, she and the children were sent immediately to the gas chambers. Friedl died on October 9, 1944, murdered at age 46. But before she left Terezin, she had hidden those 2 suitcases containing over 4,000 pieces of children's artwork. They remained concealed in the attic throughout the rest of the war. The transports from Terezin continued until the final days of the war. Of the approximately 15,000 children who passed through the camp, only about 1,500 survived. The rest were murdered in gas chambers at Auschwitz, Treblinka, and other killing centers, or died from disease and starvation in Terezin itself. Entire generations were wiped out. Children who should have become doctors, teachers, artists, parents, grandparents were reduced to ash and smoke. The loss was incalculable, not only of individual lives, but of everything those lives might have created and contributed to the world. When Soviet forces liberated Terezin on May 8, 1945, they found a camp decimated by disease and death. Typhus had swept through in the final months, killing hundreds more. The survivors, many of them children, were skeletal and traumatized, barely able to comprehend that they were free. They wandered the grounds in a daze, searching for family members, trying to understand what liberation meant when they had lost everything. The adults who had survived tried to gather the children to provide care and comfort, but how do you comfort those who have witnessed and endured the unthinkable? In the weeks following liberation, someone remembered the suitcases that Friedl had hidden. They were found exactly where she had left them, containing a treasure beyond measure. The artwork of the children of Terezin had survived. Over 4,000 pieces, each one a voice from the void, a testament to young lives that had refused to be silenced. The drawings and paintings were carefully preserved, eventually forming the core of collections that would travel the world, ensuring that the children's stories were not forgotten. The artwork revealed the inner worlds of children facing annihilation. Some pieces were bright and hopeful, full of color and imagination. Others were dark and haunting, depicting the reality of camp life with unflinching honesty. Together, they formed a portrait of childhood under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. Art historians and psychologists who later studied the collection marveled at the sophistication of the work, the emotional depth, the technical skill that children had developed under Friedl's guidance. But more than anything, they saw humanity. In every stroke and line, in every color choice and composition, they saw proof that the Nazis had failed in their ultimate goal. They could murder bodies, but they could not kill the human spirit. The survivors of Terezin carried their experiences forward into lives forever marked by trauma. Many struggled for decades with nightmares, with survivors' guilt, with the weight of being alive when so many others had died. They wrestled with questions that had no answers. Why did I survive when my friends did not? What obligation do I carry to those who died? How do I build a life on foundations of such loss? Some found ways to channel their pain into purpose, becoming educators, artists, advocates. Others retreated into silence, unable or unwilling to speak of what they had endured. The children who had created art under Friedl's guidance and survived to see liberation often spoke of how those classes had saved them. Not in the physical sense, they were still subject to the same starvation and disease as everyone else, but in a deeper way. The art had given them a reason to hold on, a way to express what they could not say, a reminder that they were more than prisoners and victims. It had preserved their humanity when everything around them sought to strip it away. Many continued to create art throughout their lives, using it as a tool for processing trauma and finding meaning. The poetry and artwork that emerged from Terezin became some of the most powerful Holocaust testimony in existence. The collection titled I Never Saw Another Butterfly, gathering poems and drawings from the children, has been published in dozens of languages and used in education programs worldwide. It brings the Holocaust down to a human scale, showing not abstract numbers of victims, but individual children with names and dreams and talents. It forces viewers to confront what was lost, not just in terms of lives, but in terms of potential. All the art these children might have created, all the contributions they might have made, all the joy they might have known. When historians and educators discuss the Holocaust, they often struggle with how to make the magnitude comprehensible. 6 million murdered Jews is a number too large for human minds to truly grasp. But a single drawing of a butterfly by a child who would soon die in a gas chamber, that is something people can understand. It makes the abstract concrete, the statistical personal. The children's art serves as a bridge between the enormity of genocide and the individual tragedies that comprised it. The teachers and adults who organized secret schools and art classes in Terezin understood something profound. They knew that education and creativity were forms of resistance, ways of asserting that Jewish children had value and deserved futures even when the world said otherwise. Every lesson taught, every drawing created, every poem written was an act of defiance against Nazi ideology. It declared that these children were not vermin to be exterminated, but human beings with minds and souls, and infinite worth. Friedl Dicker-Brandeis became in death a symbol of courage and dedication, a woman who could have saved herself, but chose instead to use her final months giving children tools for emotional survival. A teacher who understood that in the face of genocide, art and education were not luxuries but necessities. Her legacy lives on not only in the artwork she helped preserve, but in the models she provided for how to maintain humanity in inhumane circumstances. She showed that even when surrounded by death, one can choose to nurture life and creativity. The fortress walls of Terezin still stand, now a memorial and museum. Visitors walk through the same spaces where children once lived and died, seeing the barracks, the courtyards, the ramparts. The children's artwork is displayed, their poems read aloud, their stories told. The site has been transformed from a place of death into a place of memory and education. School groups visit, learning about the Holocaust through the eyes of children not much different from themselves. The lesson is clear and devastating. These were ordinary kids who loved to draw and play and dream, just like children everywhere. They were murdered for no reason except hatred. For the survivors who visit Terezin in their later years, the experience is overwhelming. They walk through spaces that exist in their nightmares, seeing them now empty and quiet, trying to reconcile memory with present reality. Some search for the exact spots where they slept or attended secret classes or created art. Others cannot bring themselves to enter certain buildings, the trauma too raw even decades later. They come to bear witness, to honor those who did not survive, to ensure that the world remembers what happened within those yellow walls. The children of Terezin left a legacy that transcends their short lives. They showed that even in the darkest circumstances, creativity and hope can survive, that art can be resistance, that beauty can exist alongside horror, that the human spirit is far more resilient than those who seek to crush it ever imagine. Their drawings and poems are not just historical artifacts, but living testimonies, speaking across the decades to new generations, warning about the dangers of hatred and the preciousness of every single life. In the end, the story of the children of Terezin is one of both immense tragedy and unexpected triumph. The tragedy lies in the numbers, the approximately 13,500 children who were murdered, their potential stolen, their futures erased. The triumph lies in the fact that their voices were not completely silenced. Through the artwork that Friedl preserved, through the poems that were hidden and saved, through the testimonies of survivors, the children speak still. They remind us what was lost, what hatred destroys, and why we must never forget. They are the butterflies that could not fly free, but whose images flutter still through memory, demanding that we bear witness, that we remember, that we say their names and honor their brief lives by building a world where such atrocities cannot happen again.